Duane and Gene. We've got both of you here today. How you guys doing? Thanks for doing this.
Doing well.
Great. Thanks for having us, Matt.
Yeah, you bet. So Duane, I know you were here maybe a month ago. We did a recording. It was a ton of fun.
It was probably longer, yeah.
Yeah. So this one is a little bit different. So me personally, I think that the only time I decide to run is if something's chasing me. And you guys have something kind of interesting that we're going to look at, and it's the Ineos 159. So give us the background on what this was and what the goal of the entire event was.
Sure. Yeah. I'll go ahead and open with that. This Project 159, as we called it internally, but was for the Ineos 159 Challenge. And to give a little bit background on that, Ineos is a large petrochemical company, and their CEO is like a big sports fan, and he likes to promote sporting events and challenges. And he came up with this one, which was to see if a human being could beat the marathon, the full marathon barrier as it was perceived of 2 hours. Could it be done in less than 2 hours? That's 1 hour and 59 minutes is kind of where the phrase came from. And that was what the whole thing was about. It wasn't a full marathon with a whole bunch of people open to the public. It was to see if this this one runner, which was the world's foremost marathon runner, and Gene, you're much better at pronouncing his name than I am.
Eliud Kipchoge from Kenya.
And he's people that know things about marathons know this guy, but it was to see if he could physically beat that perceived barrier, if a human could go under 2 hours in the marathon. And for us, we got asked to come into this because it wasn't just a typical marathon where they have just timing marks. These types of races they do have digital recording for timing. The runners have tags on them that pass kilometer marks, and that's traditionally done in more metropolitan areas where they may already have mobile cellular connectivity and stuff. This event was scheduled to take place in October of 2019 in Vienna, Austria, in an area where the mobile coverage was not really so good. The course covered a very popular park area that was with a path called Hauptallee, and there wasn't good mobile coverage. There wasn't any type of network or infrastructure or anything around in there. So they needed to have everything put in place: a network that could carry the timing information, a network that could carry the media information and stuff back, and the timing information to the timing hosts, as well as another unique requirement is they had a pace car that was in this this race that was GPS tracked, computer controlled, the whole thing, that would make sure that it kept a pace in order to have the runner get to that 1 hour and 59 or less. And there was a lot of other stuff that was going on in the background, personal trainers and things like that, to monitor health and condition of the runner and the pace runners, because he did run with a group of runners, but they were cycled in and out. Those runners came in at certain pace marks and came and cycled out, and so they were always fresh on that front. But it was really just the one person, and the pace car had to maintain that pace, and it was being tracked by through the mobile network, the Wi-Fi network, on its pace, and the data it came back with and fed back to those computers to see if it needed to pick up or slow down. And then it projected laser lanes behind it that told those runners where they had to go. So this was a very technologically advanced requirement. And then not only that, obviously it had to work 100% without fault on race day. And we had to have redundant networks. We had to have redundant fiber. We had to have redundant backhaul connectivity in case the primary internet connection went down. It would go to secondaries and so on. And I have Gene, you can go ahead and talk about more of those specific details after I finish here. But the ask came to us as the company that's generally run these types of events. It was a little bit more than what they usually do. So they called us in to see if we could help them design and architect a network to do this. And of course, the answer was yes. We do temporary events, but this one in itself had some unique challenges, and I think they're certainly worth talking about. So I hand it over to you, Gene. You can talk a little bit more about the solution, and then after that, we can get into the challenges and stuff that we faced.
Okay. So when we went on site to do an initial survey, one of the things that really struck us was the fact that we were not going to be able to attach to anything that existed. It was really quite interesting. They had wires over the road, they had trees, but everything was protected, so we couldn't attach anything to any existing infrastructure. So part of the challenge was coming up to, okay, how are we going to facilitate this when we can't hang anything on a tree? So that was one of the big things is developing a way to have the access points out from underneath the tree cover, so everything was unencumbered, things like that. So we kind of, over the course of the planning, came up with a mast type of an idea that had the access points up and above and sticking out over the road, so they were above people's heads, so that they were not going to be moved when something bumped into them, that sort of thing. So that was, for me, the biggest initial challenge. But then once we started looking at the layout of the event, we came up with an idea of building out 4 different network sectors. We called them sectors. And each of those was a complete Wi-Fi and LAN network that had backhaul to a core, but as well, each sector had a redundant backhaul through a DSL circuit. And then within each sector, we had a Wi-Fi mesh set up so that if any of the antennas, we'll call them, or any of the stations along that path within the sector, if one of those went down, the mesh would pick up and it would continue without interruption. So each one of these sectors we basically built an IDF out, in a cabinet on the ground with our ICX products in it, and then that connected back to a core at one of the trailers at the race operations area. We had a core. Then each of the quote IDFs out in the clusters sectors would be connected to all these access points that were approximately 300 meters apart down the road. So we had everything, at about 300 meter distance. And so at that point, we would be able to cover the entire pathway of the course. The course also had 2 roundabouts, one very large roundabout that included a train and bus station in the middle. So that was, one, as far as Wi-Fi is concerned, that was a troubling area. So we had to circle that entire roundabout with our equipment. And then another roundabout was around a restaurant at the other end of the path, and we had to do the same thing there. And another one of our challenges was really getting connectivity to the locations where we needed the access points. And that, we had to be very creative in that, the way we routed cables and things of that nature, because leading up to the day of the race, they were still doing construction type activities around, barricades and things of that nature. So one of the challenges as the time got closer was that all of this commotion to get things ready kept destroying the infrastructure. They would run over timing loops, and they would tear those out of the ground, and they would run over fiber, and it was a mess. We had a live test a couple days before the event where we were supposedly going to prove out our solution, and because of all the construction activity, it was very difficult to test, and it wasn't really that successful because pieces of the network would drop off, and we'd find out, oh, there's a big lorry down there dropping off, porta potties or something like that.
I have another word for that. I'd call it was kind of a disaster.
I didn't want to come out and say that. But
so
that's what it was.
The network that Gene and his guys had architected was it was a complex network, but that in turn turned out to be the easy part. I mean, it was fault backup redundant, dual fibers, fault redundant, loop redundant. We had two other egress points for if the main fiber to the backhaul at the stadium, which is where the primary internet came in, if that failed, it could go over to one or two different DSL circuits. All of that stuff was logically worked out and run beautifully. It was all this other stuff, like somebody running over and crushing the fiber, which we wouldn't know about because nothing's powered up until minutes before. It's not like we have this operations center seeing all green lights on. Okay, it's ready to go. It's like somebody go turn on the darn generator down at so-and-so place, and the guys are turning the power up and getting it going, and all of a sudden something's not coming alive, and it's it's just before the trial tests go, and it's like, oh geez, we got to do something different. So lessons learned from that was power and protection of the fiber runs. They were powering this stuff by basically the power company running down and just turning generators on, and it was dirty power. It wasn't reliable. So that was one thing that we had to get them to come up with a solution that was there, and then they did, and they tapped off of these power and light sources and brought those into our temporary IDF cabinets. So we had reliable power. The fiber was ended up running that through to trees, so getting it off the ground so they would stop crushing it, and that helped many of those logistic aspects. But it was this logistics is one of the biggest challenges, I would certainly say, on there. And I know you might probably have more to add to that, Gene.
Well, I talking about this brings up even more memories about specific things. One thing that they had to do was they had to physically remove each cabinet from the area every night. We couldn't leave this equipment out there at night, so they would have to drive through with trucks and load up our IDFs, bring them back to a trailer and store them, so that, and then the next morning they would take them all back out, reconnect all the cables, all of that, and we'd spend time waiting for everything to come up. Generators would run, and then they would run out of gas, and we'd have an IDF drop off the network. So it was interesting. It was interesting, and we had weather challenges. When you have equipment out there that's made to be in a clean space, in a metal cabinet that has air holes and things like that in the rain is not necessarily a good thing. So we had a challenge there to kind of weatherproof that equipment.
I've always wondered what would be more satisfying, because I've had situations where you have hardware installed and it just gives you fits for whatever reason. And so finally you pull it out and you replace it with something newer or more stable. And the one thing I always wondered is what would feel more satisfying, if it was to take it up to the roof and throw it off, or if it would be to put it in a rack outside and plug it in and hit it with a squirt gun. It's just, you don't know. And just kind of listening to you guys talk through this stuff, I'm thinking there are logistical nightmares that go into this Gene, you've been scoping projects out for how many years now? This is something that you do.
Yeah.
And then you take something like this, there are landmines sitting in there hiding that maybe aren't at the forefront of that thought process because you've been scoping this out for environments like you're talking about, right? There's going to be an IDF closet. There's going to be cooling and solid power and things like that. Then you get into this, and look, it's one of those events where your name is attached to something where a human being is putting himself through the absolute most grueling thing you want me to run a marathon and anything, it'll either be 2 days or 2 weeks. I'm not sure which one. And so giving him that opportunity to run this and be successful and not have anything be off, because not only did you build a solid network, but you learned how to work around all of the challenges. That's huge. I mean, that's where, like, hey man, you go be the super athlete, we'll go be the super nerds and make sure this thing gets taken care of and it runs correctly. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The pressure on the network to work without issue was incredible. It really was. So, when this was all said and done and we look back on it, it's really amazing to think of what we were able to do in that short amount of time. We only had certain requirements going in, and really the runner and the pace car and the timing was the majority of what we were there to support. But at the end of the day, when the race started, everybody was on our network. And the fact that we built a flexible network to allow them to connect to it and isolate that traffic, we had their CCTV camera network on there. We had the broadcasting network. We had the pace runners had their own network. All of it was running on our gear, isolated from everybody else. They couldn't see each other. We had firewall protection between VLANs. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful thing. And it was great that we were able to provide that network that was that flexible, because we probably could have done it with a lot less equipment, but it would have been so much more sketchy. We really built it to be as solid as we possibly could, and it was successful that way.
And that's probably why. I mean, we all know you can overcomplicate a network in a hurry,
right?
But sometimes you need to, and you kind of need to oversubscribe it a little bit, especially for things like this. I mean, if you're looking at something that you have to have 100% uptime, and you have environment variables that you can't easily navigate through, like, I mean, a generator runs out of gas, You can't do much about that other than run somebody over there with a gas tank, right? Or a gas can.
Right.
And so something I was kind of curious about when you looked at this, I mean, the physical architecture of what it's going to look like is one thing, but then you talk about all of the additional traffic that lands on that network. Were you using what protocols did you decide we kind of had to run with? Are we doing stacking? Are we doing spanning tree? Are we doing MCT? Are we doing any type of routing? How are we going to handle multicast, things like that?
All of the above. All of the above. Yeah, we had MCT in the core. We had stacking at the distribution layer. From that perspective, it was kind of a traditional network. We used OSPF to deal with all of our redundant pathways. So we had, mesh was a redundant pathway. The DSL circuits were a redundant pathway. So we had OSPF finely tuned, and, failover tests worked perfectly.
Yeah. Again, logically, the network worked fantastic. Of course, when it came to race day, it performed flawlessly then too, as it was supposed to. And again, the largest element was just managing the logistics and getting things to a point where we could count on certain things being there, things that you might not normally even give consideration, like, is there power, or is, is a tractor or something not going to run over your fiber or crush it, something like that. Things you wouldn't normally think about, that they were all in play here. And I've got to give, credit to the partner that we worked with, the primary tech company that runs these type of marathons, that their charge was taking care of all these logistics. I would just go to a meeting and say, raise my hand and say, I got to have power. I need it reliable, and it's got to be there running 24/7, get it going. And they, of course, had to work with all these different vendors and power companies and other people get all those things to do, but they did it, and it all came together. So we had an operating and reliable network. We had to come up with some innovative things like the mobility systems and antenna mounts and things like that were on the pace car that had to work together when they had all this laser projection systems, and the pace car in itself was basically a mini mobile network in itself that was going around, because they had iPads inside there that were connecting to a local network that was carrying all that timing information that the operators would use. But it all came together and it worked. It definitely wasn't stress-free. I mean, while Eliud was running that less than 2 hour thing, I was pacing this wearing the floor down, pacing the entire time, that just some crazy thing wouldn't happen and something run out of gas or come disconnected somewhere and shut us down. But we knew it from the network point of view and the design of the network that those elements were solid. It was just getting more about those things outside of our control that were of the concern. But it all came together that day, and was a fantastic event, and he succeeded at 1 hour 59 minutes and 40 seconds, crossed the line. So he did what no human had ever done. Came in under 2 hours, and we were all part of that.
That's really cool. And it's one of those things where I look at it, and if anybody ever asks me, I said, that's why you call it professional services, not services or rookie services, right? I mean, all of the things that go into that, that if something fails, the finger's going to get pointed at you, because it's our equipment sitting there, right? And so
absolutely,
you have to be able, first of all, you have to have thick skin. And if you work in any kind of technology environment where you're supporting products, you probably have it by now. And I know, Duane, we kind of touched on this in the initial discussion, and what the athlete himself had something on his person somewhere that was kind of sending all of this data. It was something in his shoe. I don't remember.
There was just a tag of some kind, and then that tag communicated with these pickup sensors that ran across the path every kilometer. And as he crossed that, then the company that was hired and contracted to do the timing information, which was Mika Timing, and then their data, of course, would transport over our network back to their timing hosts, and they would calculate, rate and pace, and obviously, where he is in the race, and that was all measured by their system, and then that system in turn fed that information back to the pace car. It showed, there were screens on the back of the pace car that would also show what that timing information is, so that the runner himself can see, where is he at on the course, and so he's got his own feedback visually by those screens, but it also went into the vehicle to the operators there, and they could adjust the pace of the car so that if it, like I said before, if it needed to speed up a little bit or slow down a little bit, because around certain corners of these roundabouts that, like Gene was talking about, it may slow down a little bit and then it had pick up. But the idea was that the pace was always being maintained. And some interesting things we learned is, talking to some of the trainers and stuff, there's all this stuff that they do during a marathon that's really interesting. The folks that run those things would probably know that. I certainly don't run marathons, so I don't know, but about human endurance and a pace they can make. And if they don't keep that right at that right edge, just right, the pace will fall off and the runner will never, ever recover up to a point where he can make up time. He just can't. So it's so critical that they maintain that. And that feedback was really important to the runner in order to know where he is. And like I said, he didn't make it just under 2 hours. He had some seconds to shave there, but it was a good event.
Did they have something on him to kind of keep track of vitals? Is that how they did that?
I'm not sure. I think they didn't at that time. I think they did during practice times, but they know him. His trainers work with him all the time. They know exactly what he does and how he does it at kilometer 1 to kilometer 2, making these paces. They know exactly that, because he does that all the time and he practices that, and that's when I think they have him more instrumented. But at this particular time, I think no.
Whose idea was this? Was it his, or did somebody approach him and say, "Hey, I bet you can run a marathon under 2 hours"?
I think it's the Ineos 159, or the Ineos came up with that. The CEO wanted to do it. Then, naturally, who's the guy to call other than the premier distance marathon runner in the world?
Yeah,
as a guy to do it.
Man, that is crazy. So when you go back and look at this and you get pulled into something else like this again in the future, what do you think are the top 3 lessons learned that come from this that you have to... I'm not saying you didn't. I'm saying when you get into this situation, there's so many unknowns, right?
Yeah.
How do you kind of use that as a bargaining chip in the future for something like this to say, look, we've done this. We know what challenges are hiding. These are the things we really need to focus on and see if we can maybe manage these a little bit differently. Do you think there are things like that?
Yeah. I think a lot of times in things like this, it's that experience that the customer's really buying. It's an insurance. It's not to say that their staff is not technically capable. They could, no doubt design these networks and stuff too, but would they know that these certain roadblocks or bumps in the road or logistic problems are very real and how to address them before they become a problem? Really, you have to bear the stripes of having been there to know that those things are coming and how to deal with it and to have the foresight that they're there and to plan for it. And that's all about it for us really in services. It's planning for those things, designing against it, making sure that it isn't an issue, at least to minimize those things and that there's some way to mitigate it. In this case, if there was any mitigation needed, it happened to happen immediately in real time.
Yeah. Gene, this might be more for you. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the past experience and understanding of providing Wi-Fi for a moving end user, the way the pace car was very unique because that pace car is moving at over 13 miles an hour. So the handoff for traditional Wi-Fi needs to be much faster and much cleaner. And you couldn't be dropping packets. Mm-hmm. So I think the knowledge and understanding of that and having done that in the past really benefited professional services in this particular instance because that was the biggest challenge technically. The rest of it was really logistics. I think that was the little magic pill there that allowed this to be successful is the way that we were able to design that, the way we were able to test that ahead of time so that we knew and we could fine tune the mobile bridge in the car and fine tune our network so that we knew what it was going to take for that to be, have a proper handoff between cells.
So that kind of leads me into my next question because I was wondering about that with the pace car because roaming, we know that Wi-Fi roaming, APs don't make that decision, the client does, right? So when you look at that knowledge, it's networks typically carry network traffic very well. I mean, that's what they're designed to do. But I was kind of curious, and that leads me into it. Was there other aspects of the technology or protocols or things that they were doing and putting on that network that created technical challenges for you guys and your team to figure out, oh, we found this little snag. We've got to figure out how to handle this traffic a little bit differently than we might handle other things. Did you run into much of that?
I would say I don't think there was anything very unique about the data traffic at all, other than the timing information needed to just be there. We couldn't have outages, couldn't be dropping those packets left and right. Mm-hmm. They wanted it at 99% or better. And so that's what, of course, it was designed and architected to do. And even on the Wi-Fi portion of it for the vehicle, could they have run the race if the vehicle would have just stopped working altogether? Of course they could have, but it may have affected the outcome. So it was an important part of that. And so we designed the coverage specifically such as with the behavior of the mobile Wi-Fi device that was in the vehicle, so that it would do those handoffs quickly and efficiently and with no losses. And that all worked very well. Um, but again, as Gene pointed out, it was the logistics of putting all of this together, and even the testing itself was challenging because again, power and were things able to get turned on at time, and was the course open so that we could go do a roam test ourselves as opposed to them doing a run with the pace runners or something like that. It wasn't just logistics around power and things, it was logistics around the entire event of all things that were having to be done, because they needed to test pace cars. They needed to test, how are they cycling in those pace runners and cycling them out, and all this kind of stuff was part of this. So we had to get our little time slots in there to do our thing and get that work done. And again, with all those daily challenges, as Gene said, a lot of this stuff had to get rolled up, part of the day and packed up and put away because it was in public areas, especially around the large roundabout, the Praterstern, that where the train station stuff, that was highly active area. So it's not like we could just stop traffic and shut it down. In fact, literally, traffic wasn't stopped until what was it, Gene? Was it 20 minutes or 15 minutes before they were like, the race. Go?
Yeah.
So, yeah, there was a lot of that kind of thing going on.
Yeah, testing was tough. It was difficult to do a production like test. We had our. It's funny to think about, but we were in our rental car with antennas hanging out and bridge in one guy's lap and a laptop in somebody else's lap, driving around town trying to match 13 miles an hour. Doing as much testing as we could, but there we were in the middle of traffic, driving around and around and around a roundabout. You can imagine somebody watching us from a distance.
We got some looks. Yeah, we got some looks. Yeah.
Well, aliens ever show up, there's multiple places they can go and be like, you know what? I don't think we need to stay here and leave. And that might be one of those situations like these guys are driving in circles, whatever. Yeah. I know we're kind of running out of time. There's one other thing I was really curious about is you build this thing out, you have to have, you can have the greatest network in the world, but if you're not monitoring it very well, you're not going to know proactively kind of what's going on and where you're at. So did you find some really solid monitoring tools that kind of help give you really clear pictures at all times so you didn't have to stress as much?
Oh, there was definitely an operations center that was put together on there. And Gene, I'll have you talk about, the tools and stuff that we use. But this entire operations center had security in it. They were looking at their screens, and they had that had the CCT cameras that were all over the entire course. And then there was the training guys that were doing, their thing with whatever was they were monitoring from the runners. And then we had the network operations portion, which we were a part of that with the company that was running this entire thing. And we used a number of tools in order to keep tabs on that.
Yeah, we had several tools involved. We had Smart Zone that we were using primarily for the wireless portion. For the switches, we had some polling tools that we were using to make sure at least we knew the status of the devices. We had some other tools that would go in and look at actual critical counters to make sure that interfaces weren't having issues, things of that nature. But we had a few people just staring at screens for the whole thing, keeping fingers crossed, if it was going to last to the end.
And there were some tools on the mobile bridges that were on the vehicle too, that we would invoke a session at start time and be monitoring that too, and we could see the handoffs and the signal levels as they were going. So we were putting a minor load on the network. We're heavily imposing any kind of load on it, but we had real-time status as to what was going on, where it was as the pace car and the runner was going around the course.
At the end of it might be one of the most stressful projects you've been a part of, but I'm sure it was also extremely satisfying and a lot of fun too, because you get to build something out like that and deal with all those challenges. It's kind of hard to walk into the next project and think, oh, this is going to be really difficult. I think you faced difficulty pretty much as head on as you could right there. So
yeah, indeed we did. And 2 hours of that race was high stress, but definitely was rewarding after it was there. And then the celebration that went on for Eliud and of course for the rest of us too, that were all part of seeing that this event happened and was very successful.
Yeah, the interesting part of being there on site while this was happening was that as it happened, we couldn't see any of it. We're in a trailer, heads down on our monitors, keeping track of things. But 50 yards away is the finish line, so this guy crosses the finish line, you just hear the crowd erupt, and you just kind of have a whew, it took, I know for me, it took me a couple days to really kind of grasp the magnitude of it, because you look at it, once you see things on the news, I mean, this was a worldwide event for people in the running world. So, it really was a big deal. So to look back on it and then see all the highlight videos and things like that, and then watching them cross the line and how exciting it was interesting to be so close and so much a part of that, but not be able to take part in that part of it until later. But it was rewarding to see that. Go, man, we did good. We really did.
Yep.
Well, I think congratulations are definitely in order. So from start to finish, how long was the project engagement?
Oh, that's interesting. It was actually pretty a hurry up. I think they gave us a call, 2 weeks or 3 weeks before the first on-site assessment.
Right.
What it was going to take.
They contacted us, I believe, the last week in July, and we had to be on site 2 weeks later, early August. And then, the getting the product and the configuration and all that had to happen between, the beginning of September and October, and sourcing all the product and things like that was another logistics, issue. And they're just, the stars aligned. They definitely did, because so many things had to happen correctly, for this to happen, and it did. It came together right there at the end.
I think it was the trial event. That was September, right, Gene? I think
Yes.
It was in September. The trial was. So that's kind of the first thing with the network all worked. But as I pointed out earlier, that's where some of the problems with the power and the night before, somebody running over the fiber and doing these things. And that was where more of those things became to bear. So it was from that time to the 4 weeks till the final event that all of that stuff had to get squared away and put back in place, then retest the entire system in the day or two just before the event. And the event was scheduled in a period of time, not on a specific day, but within a period of time, because it was dependent on weather and other conditions and stuff like that. So it just had to be ready up to the beginning of that and stood in a ready state that if they gave the word, then the equipment would get rolled out, plugged in, powered up, and everything rechecked and tested, in very short order. And then the event was happening.
Wow.
Yeah. One interesting point to this whole thing is the fact that the organizers did a study of the entire Earth to find the optimal elevation, the optimal temperature, the weather patterns for that particular window of opportunity. And that's how they picked the location of the event, was based on all of those factors. So,
for a marathon. Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
So it wasn't something they said, okay, next year we're going to do this in Vienna. They decided on Vienna that summer, right before that, because of the characteristics of the location itself.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
Just
it's a great place, though.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, so much going into it, from so many different aspects. That's really cool. Well, like I said, I mean, congratulations not only to him but you guys as well. It's a huge feather to put in your hat when you say you can pull something like that off in that type of time frame. I mean, some people, may think, oh, if you had a month or two, that's a long time. No, it's not when you're dealing with the amount of logistical issues you're facing,
right.
So yeah, absolutely amazing. Great work.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, as always, you guys always have a standing invite. I know there's a lot of really cool, interesting things that you're working on. And I know you put a lot of crazy things together, obviously, as we've sat here and talked about. So anytime you want to come back and tell us all about them, I'd love to hear about it.
We definitely will. Got
Yeah,
more stuff we'll
great.
put in the queue.
Yeah, absolutely. So awesome. Well, thanks, guys. We'll catch up and do this again soon, and hopefully the next couple projects are a little less stressful.
I would like it.
Thanks, Matt.
You bet. Thanks, guys. Take care. See you, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Ruckcast. If you just found us for the first time, be sure to follow or subscribe on your platform of choice so you can be notified of future episodes. If you have ideas for future episodes or can't find Ruckcast on your favorite platform, contact us at ruckcast@comscope.com. And as always, thanks for listening.